Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, welcome. My name is Sam. I finished foundation training in London a few weeks ago and I'm waiting to start my ST1 training in obstetrics and gynecology in another few weeks. So currently, I guess I'm in between jobs. Today's video is a Q&A, basically answering you guys' most common questions surrounding working as a junior doctor in London. There were about 5 or 6 really common questions that I got asked again and again and again, so I will address all of those questions within this video. Some of the sort of littler questions or the less common questions I have emailed you guys back, or I have DM'd you back, or I have answered your question on your comments, so check it out if you haven't already. Otherwise, this video is just going to be based off of those really commonly asked questions. So I have the questions on my phone here. So first question is, how much do you earn as a junior doctor in London? Right, so at the end of the month when I was in FY1, my average salary was about £2,300. This was after tax, after national insurance, after paying for my student loan. In London, there is such a thing called London waiting, which basically means that in addition to your yearly salary, you get about £2,000 extra, and this is to account for the higher cost of living in London. This £2,000 extra a year probably equals about £100–150 a month, which is not that much money, but obviously if you're a poor FY1, then any additional money is good money. Your pay, according to the new junior doctor contract, is dependent on how many unsociable hours you work and how many social hours you work, also dependent on how many weekends you work and how many night shifts you worked. So obviously if you're working more unsociable hours or more weekends or more night shifts, then you get more pay compared to somebody who doesn't do any of those things. So the next question is, how do you manage to find free time? Right, so if you guys follow me on Instagram, then you know that sometimes I have a social life. Sometimes I do things outside of being a doctor. It's not very common, but I do because I'm also a very lazy person. But finding free time is really easy. You have annual leave, which allows you to take some time off work. You also have 0 days, which means that if you've done, say, some on-call shifts, or if you've done some night shifts, then the week after that is a week of 0 days, which means that you're not supposed to be in work. So if you're strategic with your annual leave, i.e. you plan your annual leave at the beginning or at the end of a 0-day week, then you can effectively take 2 weeks, 3 weeks off work if you're strategic about it. And so finding free time is really easy in that sense. Also, on the most part, you will finish work at 5 if you're doing a normal day. Obviously, if you're working on calls or night shifts, and that's a whole different story, but on the most part, you will finish at 5. And if you know anything about London, you'll know that, you know, things don't close at 5 o'clock. There's still stuff to be done after 5 o'clock, after work. And so, you know, if you're somebody who has an interest in, you know, going to clubs or bars or whatever, or going to museums or whatever your interest is, you can still do all of those things after 5 o'clock in London. That's the good thing about living in London, is just the city that never sleeps, really. Actually, it does sleep, but it sleeps late. Next question is, do you really work 80 hours a week as a junior doctor in London? I was so frightened about this. When I was a medical student, that's all I heard, that if you worked in London, you worked like a dog because of the long hours. And I can tell you from my experience and from the experience of my other junior doctor friends that have been in London, that you don't work 80 hours a week. You definitely work something close if you're doing certain jobs, but you definitely don't work above 80 hours a week. That is, you know, that's a thing that does not happen anymore, from my experience and from the experience of my colleagues and my friends that I've worked in London. Now, let me give you an example. When I worked in surgery, my first job was general surgery. I was a lot busier than when I worked in cardiology, for example. So you're contracted to work 40 hours a week in your job. But when I worked in surgery, I was working an additional 15, 20, 25 hours a week sometimes, which is ridiculous, but that's just how the way it was. I never had a break when I worked in surgery, i.e. I was eating my lunch on the way to the car because there was no time to even have a break. So that was surgery for me. I would arrive at work a good hour and a half before I needed to start, to make sure things were done and things were in order, ready for the ward round to start at 8 o'clock. And then instead of finishing at 5, I would finish maybe 7, 7:30, 8 o'clock, sometimes 9 o'clock, purely because I had loads of patients, loads of jobs to do. I was the only FY1 on my team, and my consultant was really, really busy in that he was on call a lot. If your consultant is on call, that means that you're on take. Which means that any patient who comes to the hospital who has the surgical problems comes under your team, because your consultant is on call and he's on take or she's on take. And so if you end up with loads of patients because your consultant is on call a lot, then obviously you end up with having loads and loads of jobs to do for each of those patients. And this was my life, truthfully. When I was in FY1 in surgery, I definitely did not work 40 hours a week. I worked 50, 60, 65 hours a week sometimes, purely because of the hours that I put in to make sure things were done. Maybe this was me not being very efficient. Certainly it was the case for the whole 4 months, so I don't think I was inefficient for 4 months, you know. I'd imagine that you'd be inefficient at the start of your job but more efficient at the end. But for me, this was how it was, purely because my consultant was on call a lot. When I did cardiology, life was a literal breeze compared to when I was doing surgery. My contracted hours were 40 hours. My standard day was 8 till 5, I think. And I would arrive in work 5 minutes, 10 minutes before I needed to be in work, purely because it wasn't that busy compared to doing surgery. My day should have finished at 5 o'clock, and on the most part, it finished at 5 o'clock. It finished even earlier than that sometimes if the whole team was at work and the registrar would be like, oh, we're done now, you can go home, and it will be like 4 o'clock, which was really nice. Cardiology, in terms of the hours that I put in, I certainly did not work more than the hours that I was supposed to work every day. I think maybe 3, 4, 5 different occasions I stayed in work for an additional hour, but that was, you know, that was 5 occasions over 4 months. I finished on time in cardiology. After cardiology, I did geriatrics. Now, you guys have seen my video about FY1 and you know my feelings about working in geriatrics. I thought it was very soul destroying, purely because I'm not a medic at heart. I'm more surgeon than I am medic, so I found this job really difficult. There's also a whole ton of other reasons why this job was difficult, but yeah, you can go and watch my video that I made detailing why geriatrics was not a thing for me. But again, my hours here were 40 hours, and on the most part I started work on time and finished work on time. More often in this job than in cardiology did I stay later, but that was because you know, working with elderly people, I love elderly people, I love their stories, I love their chat, but just trying to deal with the social issues, their family members and all that sort of thing meant that you would finish late most of the time. Not obviously, I wasn't putting in the hours in geriatrics that I put in doing surgery, but I was definitely working a lot more hours than I was working in cardiology. Now, because of the new junior doctor's contract, there's such a thing as exception reporting, which means that if you find that you're working outside of your contracted hours, or if you're doing a job that you haven't been contracted to be doing, then you need to be reporting this, and you need to be having discussions with your educational supervisor about why this is, and the trust either has to, particularly in cases where you have worked additional hours, the trust has got to either pay you for those additional hours, or they've got to give you time off because of those additional hours that you've worked. I think this varies from trust to trust. Certainly when I was in FY1, this was something that wasn't common. I certainly did not exception report all those hours that I worked for free, because everything was new. Nobody really knew what they were doing about this exception reporting thing. But certainly now, I mean, it's been a good more than 2 years since the new doctor's contract was rolled out, and so exception reporting is much more accepted now. Trusts know what to do about it and all that sort of thing. So for you guys, if you're finding yourself working all these hours, then obviously exception report it. If you're finding yourself working a job that you haven't been contracted to be working, then exception report it, because it's not fair, and you know, it's not nice, and it's soul destroying. Now, having said about all these hours that I was working, I'm not sure that this is just unique to London. I have friends that have worked in the Wessex Deanery and in the East of England Deanery. For sure, none of these friends are working all these hours, but that's because they didn't do the jobs that I did. I think it's dependent upon the job that you're doing, and also dependent upon your consultant and your team. So I don't know if this is just unique to working in London. I think working as a junior doctor anywhere in the country, anywhere in the UK, is, in fact, anywhere in the world, is difficult, because you are working really hard, you are putting in loads of hours and things, but yeah, it's just a really difficult job sometimes. The next question is, do you have to do exams as a junior doctor? The answer to that is yes. Okay, yes and no, I guess. You don't have to do any exam if you don't want to do an exam, you know. So to be a consultant in the field that you want to be a consultant in, you have to have membership, and in order to gain membership you have to do exams. Now, you certainly don't have to do the exams when you're in FY1 or an FY2, but you can. It's up to you to do the exams if you want to do them, but you don't have to do them. Sometimes obviously you need exams to move over to the next level, but as an FY1, as an FY2, you will go through both years without having to do an exam. So you don't have to do an exam, but you can if you're thinking about the future. Next question is it really competitive being a junior doctor in London? I don't think so. I don't think it's competitive in any way. I really worked with a nice bunch of people when I was in FY1 and in FY2, and there was no competition at all. I understand that obviously gaining a place in London to do foundation training is highly competitive, but once you're here, I found the people to be really nice. Everybody was just, you know, doing their own thing. There was no sort of cutthroat atmosphere, which I experienced a little bit in medical school, but yeah, I didn't think there was any competition at all. Everybody was really helpful, everybody was just, you know, nice. So yeah, no competition. Is it expensive to live and work in London? Yes. It is expensive to live and work in London. Oh my god. Particularly for me. So when I started FY1, I rented my own flat, which meant that, you know, I was in charge of paying for everything, which is really expensive. I think to begin with, more than half my paycheck was going towards paying for my flat, paying for my bills and all that sort of thing. I also have a car, and in London particularly, parking is a whole thing. So I had to pay for parking as well as also pay for my tax, insurance, all that sort of thing. So for the first probably 6 months of being in FY1, it was really expensive. After that, I became very savvy because I wasn't interested in spending all my money on flipping rent and all that sort of thing, you know. I wanted to save some money, and so after the first 6 months of working in London, I found a place where I could rent which had all bills included. It also had a parking permit. I had to pay for a parking permit, but this was very cheap, a lot cheaper than it was where I was living, and so I was able to save a lot more of my money, and certainly I was paying about 40% of my total paycheck for rent, car parking and all that sort of thing, which was cheaper. So just a few tips for you guys. Number one, if you can find a contract that has all bills included, then take it. Those are the best contracts that you can have, I feel, in London, because you just have one payment right at the end of the month. You're not paying for your TV, you're not paying for your Wi-Fi, you're not paying for your council tax and all that sort of thing. You're just paying the landlord one amount and then they deal with the rest. And I think this is the best thing to do if you're in London. My biggest recommendation to save money if you're living and working in London is to live with your parents. I know sometimes living with parents is a whole issue, and you know, there's no space, there's no privacy and all that blah blah blah, but honestly guys, you save so much of your money than if you're living by yourself. My friends who lived and worked in London, who lived with their parents, were able to save a good 80-90% of their paycheck, which, you know, is incredible if you're living in London. Because right, that's it guys. Thank you so much for everybody who's asked me all these questions. If you have any other questions, then by all means put them in the comment section, DM me, email me and all that sort of thing. You guys know that by now. Otherwise, I will see you guys on my next video. Bye.